Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Tim, I am so excited, man. This is such an exciting episode. It's the return, my friend, of Dr. Jacoby.
Yeah, it's always great to talk with Brennan. I'm excited too.
Yeah, let's not hang about. If people don't know, Dr. Brennan Jacoby is the founder of Philosophy at Work. He is a philosopher of the workplace. We've had him on the show before. We always get such a fresh and fascinating perspective on where work is and where work's going, and we can't wait to see him. So let's welcome him now. Welcome back, Brennan. It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much, Tom and Tim, for having me. It's great to be here.
Listen, I guess, not everybody's going to have heard our first celebrated episode. One of the earliest episodes of the DEX Show, actually. It was like our third installment, I think. So I guess a good place to start would be for you to make a brief introduction of yourself and, of course, Philosophy at Work, too.
Yeah, sure. So, Brennan Jacoby, I'm a philosopher and the founder of Philosophy at Work, which is a collective of people like myself that have backgrounds in philosophy and business psychology, and we work with businesses from all sorts of industries, all sorts of sectors on how they think they're best. So what that really looks like is core learning and development workshops around things like critical thinking, strategic thinking, curiosity. I did my PhD on the topic of trust, and so a lot of times it's working with groups on how they create the kind of environment or culture where people feel safe enough to think their best. The other thing that's worth saying is a lot of times I have people tell me that they're sort of quietly playing in the back of the mind, trying to guess my accent, trying to work it out. So for the sake of full transparency, I'm originally from the US, in Detroit specifically, but then did my PhD in Australia and am now speaking to you from the UK, so just north of Oxford.
Nice. So, I mean, it's been a couple of years since we last spoke, and when we last spoke, it was a timely conversation because we were right in the thick of the pandemic and all of the kind of all of those impediments to clear thinking that the pandemic presented us with on a small and large scale. All of the how blinding events and stress could be was very, very clear. So it was great to talk to you and discuss the Stoics. But I guess a good place to start just be asking how things have been for you for Philosophy at Work over the last couple of years and how that's evolved and with it your thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, I mean, maybe if I back up even just a little bit further, I've been doing this work for about the last 10 years or so. And in that period, there's been a real sort of increase in, I suppose, awareness of the importance of how we think, right? So I think when I started doing this work, there was sort of, an appreciation for, yes, of course, how we think matters, but we've got things to do. We've sort of got work to get on with. Surely if we talk about philosophy, it's going to just be sort of navel gazing or maybe too abstract or something. And then I think, like so many other things, the last few years have accelerated an increase in recognition of how important the way that we think is. So, whether that was paying attention to our mindsets and sort of what we think and how that thinking informs what we do and how well we take care of ourselves, or even just saying, okay, there's a lot coming at us really fast and we need to sift through the information, or we need to sort of make sense of things and do our strategy. We need to be creative. We need to sort of process what's going on. There's been a recognition that that's not just about operations, that the thinking that informs that is really crucial as well. And so there's been a lot of need, I think, for consideration of how we think and a recognition that what we think is not divided from what we do. And so especially over the last few years, we've been able to do a lot of really interesting work around how people think about work itself, something we might get into today, and how we think together, how we think alone, how we use things like curiosity to ask questions that open up conversations and draw out some of the thinking in the room. And maybe that's one other thing that's worth saying is there's been a lot of attention in the last few years, and rightly so, and it's been great to see this, but attention on how we don't just sort of hire for diversity, but how we benefit from the diversity of the thought. diversity of thought, I should say, in the room. And one of the big places that we're working on is saying, well, in order to benefit from that thinking, we need to make space where people feel safe enough to share their views, are skilled up in how we ask questions of each other, that do some of that work. And so it's a lot of that sort of co-creative critical thinking that we're focusing on these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into a subject matter that's close to hand then. We recently had Jacob Morgan on the show, famous Jacob Morgan, and to in the instance, my moderate surprise, he's one of the real architects of the whole space of employee experience. And what he was telling me on the show was that he really feels the pendulum has in recent years swung, if anything, too far in favor of the employee in regards to the employee-employer dynamic. What I wanted to ask you, Brennan, was, look, philosophy has obviously long had a lot to say on the themes of freedom and responsibility and discipline and all kinds of related issues such as this. So I wonder if you could start by offering some insight into that dynamic between the employer and employee, and tell us what you think about where things might presently be.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and one that I've just been navigating a lot with, in very practical terms, with a lot of the clients that we work with, whether that's sort of in like law firms or tech firms and across the board, on the sort of at the coalface, we could say. A lot of how this is presented is in terms of just trying to get sort of people in a room together, or whether that's a virtual room or a physical co-located room, to do something that we've put on, that an employer has said, hey, we all need to align in a certain way. And maybe pre-pandemic, when I say that, I mean the COVID pandemic, it was sort of assumed that we would do that in a certain way. And now it feels like everything's up for grabs. And probably, part of what I think Jacob was touching on is that way in which it feels like more the power has shifted over to the employee, right? So instead of where it might have just been before, like, hey, we have this contract, and the written or unwritten expectation is that you're in the office these sorts of hours, and we all sort of care about coming in to do these sorts of things. And now it feels like that's all up for grabs. And so there's a lot to be said about power, and I think it's a great question. And where my mind goes first, I think, is to think about employment and the employer-employee work relationship as a kind of social contract. So like what the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau used to talk about, right? So saying that we can't do everything all ourselves, so we have to sort of contract with others to help protect ourselves, keep ourselves safe, to get everything done. And I think in simplest terms, the employer-employee contract is sort of, we will agree to pay you X if you deliver on Y, right? Now, that's all fine, I suppose we could say, but traditionally there was a lot of unwritten expectations about that too. Like, not only will you just deliver the widgets and we'll pay you the package, but we expect that you'll do that between these hours and in this physical place. And so the way that contract was understood was in terms of time and space, and even some other things. I was listening this morning on my run to Oliver Burkeman's recent book, 4,000 Weeks, where at one point, so it's all about, that book is all about sort of time, understanding your relationship with time, really. But at this one moment I was listening to this morning, he talked about the move in the history of work from one which was much more piecemeal to one of employment. And he said, you went from this period where it was kind of just like workers were left to sort of get on with it however they saw fit, to now giving more power to the employer, to the extent where it's like, well, hey, it's not okay if you come to work drunk. It's not okay if you sort of do it on your own terms. And now I don't think we're seeing a shift back to sort of what you eat and drink about work, but there is more of that pendulum swinging to say, well, actually, I want to do it on more of my own terms. And I think that can scare employers, but I think I'm probably on the other side of the view than perhaps Jacob. I would say that what we're seeing is not an unhealthy sort of shift of power, but what we're seeing is a reframing of the contract. So, which is moving from an understanding that was based primarily on time and space to one that is being based primarily on value added. And so we have more and more employers saying, well, hey, I'm getting the job done well. I'm getting it done, yes, on time. So there is still that reference to a temporal sort of sphere, but it's not primarily about time. It's I'm providing the value that you're expecting of me. Why should you care about sort of when and where and how I do it? I'm just delivering the value. I'm coming up with the work, the ideas, and those sort of things. And admittedly, this is being seen more in spaces that are sort of, in air quotes, thought of as knowledge work. It's harder to make that shift if you're working on an assembly line,
Sure.
but that's part of what's going on, and it's a shift of power, but it's one that that to some extent I think was always there. We were just sort of, I think the employers just sort of held some of the reins of power to the extent that it wasn't questioned, and it's been questioned over the last couple of years because we've seen how well people can get on with things and be effective and efficient when working, from home or from wherever. So I think we're just in a moment where nothing is fully settled, and that's uncomfortable because there's a lot at stake, not least of payments for real estate and expensive offices, and other things as well. There's a lot going on, but I think to acknowledge the voices and perspectives and preferences of teams and employees as individuals who work best in certain ways is a good thing. And so what we'll probably see shake down, and what I'm seeing shake down in a lot of businesses we work with, is new conversations about how do we do this relationship really well, but it's in a more nuanced, location specific, instance dependent kind of way rather than a blanket one. And I think that's a good thing.
And given that dynamic that you just laid out, what advice, if any, would you give to the employers and employees respectively?
Yeah. So a quick answer and then a slightly longer answer. I think the advice that I hear myself often saying to people, whether it's sort of, so maybe for people that didn't join us for the previous conversation, just a little bit more backstory in terms of sort of what I actually do. A lot of times what it looks like is working with teams, but really, to be honest, this conversation comes up, or these issues come up more when we're working with senior leadership teams, right? And we're talking about how they can sort of develop their business's strategy and retain talent, engage talent, have the best possible scenario. And the thing that I keep hearing myself say, and that keeps coming up in those conversations, is we need to really use our curiosity. And what I mean by that is not some sort of vague sense of awe or something, but exercising our curiosity in the form of empathy, to lead with questions, to ask the team leaders that we have, to ask the team members that we have, how would this sort of scenario work for you? If we said, hey, let's go to a 4-day work week, or if we said we're going to operate in this way going forward, what does that mean to you? How does that strike you as? And I know there's a lot of businesses doing listening exercises effectively, but some of them are more authentically curious, I think, than others. And when we've got a really authentically curious process, which is to say, we really don't think we already have the answer. We really want to know. We want to go on the journey together. That sort of co-created way forward is always helpful. It's scary because, especially if you think that you are rightly the sort of leader of the organization, and people are looking to you for an answer, then to say, hey, I don't think there's a clear way forward, and we need to work through this together, then that can feel like you're admitting defeat almost before you get started. You're not, and it's not true, but it can feel that way. And so I think there's a need to have a quite sort of mature approach to curiosity, where we've thought about the kinds of questions we're asking. We're not asking questions which we should know the answers to, but we're asking questions which are really generative and expansive, and bringing other people into the conversation so that it's not only inclusive, but actually going to create something that then people buy into more likely because they've been involved in it. So I said there was one short answer and then one longer one. That was my attempt at a short answer. The slightly longer one is that uh, I I think about what Plato wrote in his sort of story of the cave. I don't know if you've come across the allegory of the cave before, but it's one read on the human experience, the sort of human condition, right? And I think it's helpful here. So if I just sort of tell it in a nutshell, so Plato, ancient Greek thinker, arguably, well, he's been called sort of the key source in Western philosophy, which is not all of philosophy, but Western philosophy at least. And the story of the cave goes like this: you have to imagine that there's a cave, and in the cave there's some people that are chained up to a wall, but it's not an external wall. This wall is a sort of short wall that is kind of in the middle of the room, right? And it only goes up maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet. So these people are on the far side of the wall, chained up to that wall so that they can't move, and they're being made all the time to look at the back wall of this cave, right? Now there's a fire, a sort of old school slide projector, a sort of classical ancient equivalent of a slide projector. There's a fire behind them that's casting shadows on the wall that they're looking at. And the shadows are being made by little sort of figurines of trees, people, horses, all the stuff in the known world. And those little puppets, those characters, the figurines, are being sort of moved along the wall that they're chained up against, so that because of the fire behind it, the shadows of those things are being cast on the wall. So hopefully you've got this sort of mental image of these people sat against the wall. They're chained in every way, so they have to look there. They've been chained since sort of birth, so this is everything they've always known. And what Plato's wanting us to understand is that what they're seeing is what they think is real, but it's not really real. And then in the story, he says philosophy is sort of personified. So he has this character that he talks about as philosophy that is sort of coming in and unchaining the people and bringing them out into the daylight, where they see like real trees, not just sort of shadows of puppet trees, and real people and real everything, right? And now there's a statement there about how Plato thinks about philosophy and its uses. But the thing that I wanted to bring up is he says, when you first unchain people, how will they feel? And he says in the book that they'll feel really uncomfortable. They'll be blinded by the actual sunlight. They won't want to do this. They want to go back to the shadows. And I think something kind of similar is going on in the world of work and life and stuff these days. There's a lot of, the commute is like the classical example, right? The classic example. We just used to get up and do this thing every day. It's sort of, we didn't really critique it too much, or maybe we did, we moaned about it a bit, but, we sort of just took it for granted. And then something happened that made it so that we all suddenly just had to work in different ways. And that was sort of, I don't want to be too dramatic, but that was kind of like unchaining us from some of the assumptions about what we thought was really real. And now we're sort of in various stages of coming out into what might be the light, what might be other shadows, and it's uncomfortable. There's a lot of power shifting, and there's a lot of power to be grabbed. And so I think what we're experiencing, this is why I say I probably disagree with Jacob. I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing. I just think we're in the transition period where it's uncomfortable, and we've got to work out, is this discomfort just because we're blinking into the sunlight of something that's better, or is it discomfort because actually something's going on that shouldn't be going on? And I probably lean towards the prior rather than the latter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the cave shadows could be an entire episode on its own to explore there. That's a fascinating way to look at how things change. I want to go back to your short answer. You talked about, and maybe transition a little bit, the techie in me wants to talk about technology a bit, but you talked about the human element of curiosity and empathy and the ability to create thoughtful questions. And the transition for me here is that one of the most potentially disruptive technology advancements we've seen in a while is this whole ChatGPT phenomenon, right? I don't know yet that it is truly disruptive, but It has the potential to be. And it's not your area of expertise. It's certainly not mine. I actually don't know anyone who could claim to be an expert in it. But that lack of expertise kind of makes your imagination go wild, right? What's going to happen with all of this this new area of technology? So let's start with the philosophical side of it, the perspective on AI in general. Has the world of philosophy anticipated this emergence, and what can we take from it as we enter into kind of a new technological era?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question, Tim. And I think right up front, to distinguish between, I think it's helpful if we distinguish between philosophy, philosophies, and philosophers,
Right.
right? So where philosophy is the pursuit of wisdom, the sort of a way of thinking which has truth or sort of certain values at its heart and is trying to think critically about existence and everything, right? And then philosophies are accounts of what counts as a good life or wisdom, and philosophers are the people that generally have been credited up with coming up with those philosophies. So I think if to take your question, if we say, has philosophy sort of seen this coming, or what can it say that's helpful
Right.
about ChatGPT and AI and everything? I think philosophy as a thing itself, that first term, as I've tried to drive some wedges between them and distinguish, um, provides a really helpful mode of existing, not just thinking, because whether it's the printing press or television or ChatGPT, whatever the new technological advancement is, it's brought some of the same questions about, okay, well, now we have created something that is unknown to some extent. Its capacity is unknown. And what it means for it to be done ethically is unknown. And the implications of it raise some questions. All these different sorts of things that people have thought of. And the way forward is going to require not just quantitative sort of knowledge, but qualitative, critically reflective sort of knowledge, and that is the process of philosophy. So I think philosophical thinking gives us some tools that are really useful anytime we have something that's new, whether that's navigating a pandemic, to some of the stuff we've already been talking about, or thinking about how we use something like ChatGPT really well. But then, to get more sort of specific to your question, philosophers certainly have said some things about AI, and even if a lot of it goes right back. Again, I'm sort of dealing mostly today in Western thought, but in a lot of it goes back to Aristotle, again in ancient Greece, who distinguished what it meant to be a human from other animals as being a rational animal, right? So part of that is saying what makes us beings like us is our ability to think in a certain way. And then if you fast forward throughout, we get to things like the Turing test, and to be able to say, well, a machine qualifies as having intelligence if it can produce the kind of content that is so good we wouldn't be able to tell if it's produced by the machine or by another human, right? And Turing is talked a lot about by philosophers, but is not sort of filed under philosophy usually. But Descartes, the French philosopher, 1600s, devised a similar set of principles where he was saying, this is in his book when he makes his famous "I think therefore I am" claim, and so he's thinking about what it means to have intelligence and how doubt works and what ideas and formation and consciousness is. And along that track says, if a machine were able to respond across all the sort of universal ways that humans respond, then we would have to say that it has intelligence. He thought that wouldn't be possible because he said that machines are only responsive based on what we would call today the algorithms that they're given. Now, the extent to which, this is where we kind of get out of my bounds, I think, for AI, the extent to which artificial intelligence can go beyond the script they're given, right? I think challenges some of that. So traditionally, philosophers have said, well, hey, what makes human cognition significant, and not just something that we as physical beings do, but as members of the moral community do, is we have choice. We can go beyond the
Right.
script. And that seems to be a space where, in moral philosophy, that's the kind of remaining outpost, is like, you, you're a person, not just a machine or not just an animal, if you have choice.
Hmm.
And this is where, there might be some of your listeners out there that go, yes, there's AI that has choice. I'm not sure. So I think
Right.
that's, if we can, so what philosophers and philosophies have said is that, if to the extent that we can create a machine that can generate choice, and that's not just sort of selection between options, um, but being able to come up with effectively a why, right? Like a reason for existing, and
Yeah.
then from that reason having intentions and motives and choosing based on that, then we've got something that looks like a member of the moral community, and that we could, um, you know, critique and imprison for having, used their will in certain ways.
Hmm.
So I think there's that. I think there's, you know, hopefully that's helpful food for thought. I wonder if, I don't know. There's some things running in the background that this always makes me think of. But I'm conscious I've been sort of going on a little bit already. So do you want to come back to me first before I sort of
Yeah, I'm curious, as you talk through all of that, the concept of boiling it down, and some may agree, some may disagree, but boiling it down to the fact that maybe AI is automating human response, right? You ask it a logical question and you try to automate some level of human style response. But one issue that it raises is around human redundancy, right? What do you feel philosophy tells us, or philosophers tell us, about restraining ourselves technologically in order to protect that human status quo? Or does self-limitation go against our very nature?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this does get to that other thing that was on my mind. I think it's, I always think, whenever I hear questions about AI and humanity, and this great point about human redundancy. Um, there's always been this question I couldn't quite put my finger on, and I think it's something like, what are we afraid of? What's at risk
Hmm.
if we were to become redundant, right? And there's, on the face of it, we could say, okay, there's technology already that has made workers redundant in various ways. But actually, I even think that's too bold a claim. There's technology that has made certain tasks that those workers did redundant.
Hmm.
But if we say there's technology that has made a worker, that is a person who has a history and a first name and a life in a specific town, someplace in the world, who gets up and goes to work. If we say that there's technology that makes all of that redundant, it somehow feels really insulting. And um, and this, I think, is really illuminating, because we have technology that is doing the task of that worker, maybe even faster and better. But there's things that the person is bringing that is more than just the writing they do or the widgets they make or whatever it might
Yeah.
be, right? And so if we think about, the human redundancy thing, philosophy doesn't really care about maintaining the status quo, because on the face of it, everything is up for grabs with philosophy. It's always, the game is all
Mm.
about critiquing everything and trying to move forward. Um, so, I don't think philosophy or philosophers would say, no, we've just got to protect how we've always worked. Um, but one thing that I think philosophers do, and philosophy does really care a lot about, is the truth, right? And that there's something, I think, part of what we see coming up whenever you study like the philosophy of personhood and humanity and stuff, is that we are more than just that which we create or produce. There's something about the spirit, the human spirit in which we do it, or the creativity of it, or the ability to do otherwise, which goes back to that matter of moral choice. And so even if we have something like ChatGPT that, can write a better blog about philosophy than me, I don't, does that make my blog writing redundant? Certainly not, at least in one way, and that's in the meaning that when I sit down and write a blog, it adds meaning to my life, right? And that it's not transactional. There's something about processing the thinking and getting it out there and engaging with the audience and other people responding and sharing their thoughts and us sort of co-creating understanding. Where if we said, hey, some tech could create a better, like sort of better researched piece than Brennan could. That's quite cool, and kind of that, that's got its place, but that's not all the meaning that's created by the work that we're doing.
It's a really good point because for ages people have asked themselves, what's the meaning of life? AI for me right now, that kind of imagination gone wild. It's not just replacing my tasks at work, it's replacing my thought at work, my thinking at work. And that's my very existence, and what I bring to my employer is me as an individual and how I think. And if that starts to become redundant, I need to reassess the value that I bring to my employer and to my work. So what do you think the end game is there for employees? How should employees start to think about the meaning of work and what they bring to the table?
I mean, that's a huge question.
Yeah.
It's definitely the right one that we need to be thinking about. But yeah, thinking about the meaning of work. If I just take a step back and think about what you mentioned there of, just that very live case, right? Of, okay, doing some knowledge work, and the value I take myself to be adding is my thinking on this project. Well, now there's AI that maybe comes up with better thinking around that. I think to at this point in human history, there's still, if I'm not mistaken, a need for the sort of driver of that AI,
Right.
the sort of human guide, to sort of shepherd it, right? To sort of say, okay, we want the algorithm to look in this way rather than that one. And it almost moves the human value add to a higher level, a more sort of meta move. So rather than coming up with, we've seen this before in previous chapters of human history work and stuff, where it used to be we need a human to draft a contract or to crunch some numbers and come up with a statistic. Well, now we have AI to write the contract and come up with statistics, and we saw that now the move was, okay, the human needs to come up with the right questions to put into the machine to come up with the stats, or needs to decide what laws are relevant for the contract. So if we've got an AI that's now doing that work, I think it just pushes us one higher level to go, what projects are ethically important, or what are the ethical concerns around this? So it in one sense, I think it, technology, when it's done well, should enable us to do higher value work, right? But there's a lot of question about what counts as higher value. So you could say, well, that's less manual labor, it's more sort of thought-based labor, but not necessarily. There's nothing like the satisfaction of chopping wood, or different things, right? So we could spend all day talking about what counts as different values of work and stuff. But for this case, you could say, well, it's pushing us higher to a higher level of
Good.
saying, okay, well, what sort of questions should we be asking? What are the broader implications of this? And I think that's one of the things that maybe we need to be thinking about is, well, what are the skills that help us do that kind of work? Because now we've got to be thinking on a different level. But I think there still is, and I would suggest always value for that kind of human creative work.
Yeah, very well said, Brennan, and
Yeah.
very well said throughout. It was wonderful hearing you, hearing your perspectives once again after a couple of years.
you.
I think a lot of people going to want to know where they can find more of those perspectives and more of your work. So please tell them where they can find you in Philosophy at Work to follow and find out more.
Yeah, certainly. So the usual places. I'm on LinkedIn at Dr. Brennan Jacoby, Instagram as well at Philosophy at Work, and our website is www.philosophyatwork.co.uk, and the at in the middle is spelled out. It's not an at sign. So philosophyatwork.co.uk is the website, and all the contacts and all the stuff is on there as well.
Wonderful. Brennan, thanks so much for coming back on the DEX Show. It's a pleasure.
Thank you both so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's always nice to have a space where we can sort of get into things that, are really deep and really meaningful and important to be discussing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Brennan.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.